I mean, with each painting, what I'm trying to do is trying to figure out what it is that I want from the work. And when I feel as if that investigation is actually completed, then the painting is done. I stop working from the painting when I stop learning from it. When I first came here, I lived in an area called Kensington, Brooklyn. It's this mixture of, it's an old Hasidic Jewish and Italian mixed neighborhood. It's very much Brooklyn. I moved here in 1989, so I've been in this space. I've been in Williamsburg 27 years. I learned to paint really in Boston. I was studying at Mass College of Art, and I was a painting professor there. His name is George Nick, and I studied with him. He basically taught me how to paint. It's a very unusual kind of training because I was taught as an observational painter. In other words, I was taught like what the world really looked like, and how to interpret that, and how to think about that, and how to digest the information, so to put it in on the canvas. Didn't so much teach me how to paint per se, but really teach me what the world looked like. I mean, after 4 years of doing that, I really get the sense that, you know, when I look at the world, this is what I'm really seeing, and these are the possibilities, the different ways in which that can be translated onto the canvas. Finished my MFA at Yale, and at Yale it was a different kinds of experience because at Yale they assume that you don't go there to learn to paint. I mean, basically they expect you to know how to paint already. So at Yale was more a kind of intellectual exchange, you know, with the different professors. Really, you learn about art by interacting with your classmates. Out of that, you know, came the intellectual training that I had. So that becomes, you know, how one grows in an art school intellectually, really. So, you know, so it's like you can see, it's like a very eclectic group of people. I mean, these are artists who work very differently. Go into a situation in which you're debating with your colleagues, then you begin to formulate your ideas and then begins to see if they hold up, or maybe begins to see that they're, you know, full of crap. And then one begin to adjust one's theory, for the lack of a better word, to better reflect what it is that the artist desire to do. Actually, when I was in undergraduate school, I was painting a lot of dolls, and although they were more multi-figure, there were like a lot of different toys, for example. And when I started painting realistically, I was also painting a lot of flowers, although I was painting just with a palette knife. And I did that for a few years. One of the, I think it's the American illustrator, Rockwell Kent, that he says sometimes you have your best ideas when you are young, and then you spend the rest of your life trying to get back to them. So in a sense, a lot of the subject that I do, they go back full circle. You know, I was painting toys earlier, I was painting toys now, I was painting flowers many years ago, now I'm painting flowers again. The only thing that really changed is probably the approach. I mean, when I was painting toys before, they were more detailedly rendered. And now when I work with toys, they're much more loosely painted. When I was painting flowers before, I was painting with palette knives, you know, in slabs of color. When I'm painting flowers now, I'm, you know, exploring brushwork. So the technical side of it is really what keeps changing or evolving. The subject, I would say, they get recycled. I think when you're painting, you want to create an event for the viewer. I mean, you want each painting to have a little, you know, to have its own piece of drama to it, so to speak. I guess in twofold, that comes about as a kind of, it's not a very good word, but that comes about as a kind of style, for example, of how you approach it, and that comes about based on the subject and how you approach it. What one aims to do is that you want the work to create that kind of moments or events for the viewer. The question is how you're going to do that, and you do it through the different means. All of your arsenal as an artist is how you want to create it. I guess the difference of what I'm doing right now compared to how I painted previously as a grad student, for example, is that as a graduate student, the work they were more tightly rendered, and everything was kind of given to the viewer. Whereas right now, obviously they're a lot looser. But I also want to create for the viewer that somehow, and it doesn't matter if I work on a painting for 2 weeks or 2 months, that to create that sense that the painting is actually put together in front of the viewer, that what the viewer is actually looking is a kind of impromptu kind of movements. Lights, brushwork, composition, those are the arsenal that the artists use. How to bring them to life? I think the lights and dark has a lot to do with it. The sense of drama that one can create through the sense of lights and dark, that's a part of it. The composition has a lot to do with it. And more recently, the brushwork has a great deal to do with it. How to use brushwork to create a sense of whatever is that I'm painting, like still lifes or fruits, or how to make them look like they're actually moving. That kind of expressionistic approach to the work, I think, is what keeps the subject but becoming from too static, but rather towards a more of a sense that somehow the painting is just something that were conceived at the moment for the viewer. That brings a sense that they become real character. But in a lot of ways, what they really are is they're vehicles. They're really vehicles to carry they become container, so to speak, of the light, and they become container of a lot of these formal issues. So when you look at dolls, they're really just different characters. And earlier we were talking about bringing those characters to life. When you think about it, when you pick up a doll, they're meant for children to play with. But oftentimes when you really look at them, they're kind of creepy. Well, they always look like they're living in their own world. And that really comes in the selections of the different toys. That when you look at them, that there's always a sense of, they're funny. Dolls are kind of funny. But I think when you look at them, what I want to convey is a sense of how creepy they can also be. Because they're not like, they're dolls, but their eyes grow in different directions, for example. That kind of stuff. The composition becomes less of an issue right now because the toys are basically, you have a rectangle. The rectangle is the canvas or the panel, and then you have toys, and they're just, and they're there. So it's not like the kind of composition like a Cézanne would be a composition, but it's really kind of consistent. I guess that's why they look like portrait, because the composition is one in which when you're looking at those dolls and you look at their faces, they feel like portrait posing, smack in the center or on the side, looking at the viewer. Usually they have a smile of some sort, and sometimes I would add a little bit of twinkles to their eyes, for example. Trolls kind of interesting because like in computer language, trolls mean someone who is just always picking a fight. Troll is someone who's trolling a forum or trolling a board or trolling a Facebook page. So those are trolls. Trolls goes around and try to make trouble. They have a very specific language to them. Or I would paint a kind of spam, for example, and that's a computer language. No one likes spam mail, for example, so it paints actually a kind of spam. So I guess it's a sort of inside joke somewhat when you look at a painting of a troll or when you look at a painting of spam. Yeah, some of them actually, I don't know much about them because I picked them up for the visual ingredient, and sometimes people will look at the painting and say, oh, that's Melvin, or that's from that's like a character from the South Park, for example. So then I learned something. I learned about where they're coming from. Well, flowers can become kind of like a Raja test for a lot of people. I mean, you can look at flowers and say, geez, this is really pretty. You can look at flowers and they could feel kind of pleasant. But you can also look at flowers, depending on what kind of flowers it is. They can also look like vagina. What you come away with is, I think, what the viewers actually desire to see, or where the viewers are really coming from. I would do a painting in 5 or 6 stages, for example, and because I'm satisfied with the brushwork, I'm satisfied with how things are painted, because I'm unsatisfied with the value range of where the painting is, then I get to, invent my own brushwork. I get to be the boss that way. Brushwork is actually its own language, and different artists have different language. The closest when I'm looking at my painting is probably the brushwork, something like a Frank's Hall or something like that. And it has to be, and the brushwork has to carry the light, has to carry the form, has to carry the space. It has a lot of work to do. When I'm painting, I think about what would Rembrandt do? What would Chardin do? What did Vermeers do? I mean, obviously, they could all paint the same thing, and the paintings would look very different. And I think that when one paints, one is always having a dialogue with that. A Vermeer would approach painting a chair, for example, in a particular way, and then you get to come along and say, well, I'm going to paint the chair. It could be like a Rembrandt chair, it could be like a Frank's Hall chair, it could be like a Chardin chair. But then you can also think like, well, it could be a Dik Liu chair. Well, what does that really mean? And that's the magic of painting.